All right, welcome back to the Warriors Garden. Today we're going to do our first interview. Super excited to have this happen. We actually have a returning guest. We're going to go over some different questions about his job, about some of his hobbies, and then about what he thinks needs to be changed or is lacking in young men, advice that he has for young men today. So we're going to do our scripture reading, and we'll get right into the video. All right, today's scripture reading is Ecclesiastes 5, verse 10. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity. All right, we'll get back into the rest of the video. All right, welcome back. Today we're interviewing Doug. You guys have seen him on the channel before. A little introduction about Doug. He grew up in a good household. His father was a cop, his mother a teacher. He has two brothers, and they've always had a golden retriever. Doug worked his way through college. He worked at a couple retail stores and also at the college. After college, Doug picked up welding for a little while and worked a welding job before he decided he wanted to become an EMT. He is currently an EMTB, which he has been for a little over a year and a half now. And on the prepared citizen side, Doug grew up shooting his whole life, whether it be hunting side of things or just shooting for fun. And then in 2019, roughly, Doug decided he wanted to be a more prepared citizen and to really get into shooting and making every round count, tracking his shots, and developing his skill set to be a prepared citizen. Doug's somebody I think that really embodies the warrior in a garden mindset, and somebody I think that you guys could all learn from, has valuable information. Doug's 25 years old, so like this channel is going forward, is pushing what it looks like to be a good young man today in society, a productive member. So we're going to let Doug talk. We got some questions for him, and we'll break this into some segments for you guys. So let's get after it. All right. Welcome, Doug. So the first question we got on the list is why you became an EMT. So you obviously are an EMT, as we talked about, and I know people want to know more about that.
So I actually initially became an EMT I signed up for school while I was still welding full time.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess a little background on myself. I went to school for welding initially, which was a 1-year cert program, and then I went to Bachelor's of Industrial Technology, minor in industrial maintenance. The loose plan there was that I was going to weld as a career until my body grew tired of the hard labor, and then I would get a desk job with the bachelor's degree and do like more of a management position. Well, a couple months out of college, I had worked full-time welding jobs during the summers for a few of them, and then the one that I got out of college, I worked it for a couple of months, and about halfway through there, I decided that I wanted to be an EMT because I wanted to be prepared for like industrial accidents, workplace accidents. Basically, I just wanted to increase my trauma knowledge for somebody's arm getting caught in a machine or something like that. Bad burns. There's lots of stuff that can happen in a welding shop. So that was your initial intent. Just wanted to be kind of generally prepared for that kind of thing, as well as just like if I were ever to happen upon a car crash or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the original mindset or thought process, I suppose. And then shortly thereafter, I got pretty tired of the welding job that I had and just kind of decided that it was not something I wanted to do for a career. So decided that I was gonna enroll in EMT school with the intention of that being my next I guess you could say career change. While I was doing that, I moved back to my hometown, which was also my college town.
Mm-hmm.
And worked for the college again, doing essentially what I had been doing as a student, just in a slightly different capacity, working for dining services on campus. And then going to EMT school, which the school that I went to was night school, essentially. So 2 days a week in the evenings, there were 4-hour blocks. The 1 day a week was lecture, and the other day of the week was lab. So it took about 6 months ish to complete that program. Once it got rolling, it was like October through like May, give or take. And then, I wasn't sure going through it if I was going to actually like it, with all the stuff that you see and have to do and deal with, and just bodily fluids and people and all that. So
Right.
I was a little hesitant. That's actually why I didn't try to get sponsored to go through the school, because there's like some volunteer departments will pay for your school if you agree to work for them for like a year or whatever. I declined that and paid on my own dollar because I didn't want to get through school, realize that I couldn't handle any of it, and then be on the hook for a year.
Right.
So, but didn't end up having any problem with that. Really enjoyed clinicals. And then went on to work full time for the agency that I did clinicals with, and I've been doing that for over a year and a half now. So it's been good. So yeah, I guess the original reason was just to kind of be generally more prepared, and it turned into a job that I've actually really enjoyed. So
Right.
that was a good move for me, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, expanding your knowledge and building yourself as a better man. Yeah, led to a full-time job for now. So kind of talked on it a little bit with the bodily fluids and whatnot. What's the EMT life like? So what are you experiencing on a daily basis, I guess, or for your work time?
So it's going to depend very heavily on where you are an EMT and what your specific like role is, or like what your department does. So in my case, I work full time for a hospital-based for-profit EMS service that is in a relatively speaking rural area, right? Mm-hmm. So my coverage area is half. Actually, by land area, it's more than half of the largest county in the state. And we're the only ALS rig for that half, right? The other half of the county has 3, just based on like run volume and population. During the day, they have 3 rigs, we have 1. So I think the longest EMS run that I've done that was like a 911 call that was like never left the coverage area, like it wasn't a transfer or something, was like 110 miles. Wow. And it took like 4 hours, right? Yeah. My partner, who's been doing this way longer than I have, has had like some snowmobile PI accidents, which just means like a crash, where he was like on scene for like 14 hours because they're that far back and it's that hard to get them out. You have to coordinate with other departments to rescue and stuff. So obviously that kind of job and responsibility is going to be way different than working like in an inner city unit where you're running calls constantly, but your coverage area is like 5 square blocks, right. 5 city blocks. So the way that my department works, our end of the county does 24-hour shifts. So we work 8 days a month. 2 of those are 12-hour days just to make like the overtime work out. So we have bunk rooms at our garage, and we can pretty much do whatever we want when we're not actively running calls. Some days in a 24-hour period we'll do 15, 16, 18 calls plus. I think my partner's record is 23 in 24 hours. Jeez. And remember, these are like 20, 30, 40 mile calls that take an hour plus each. So it definitely can get busy, and there are other days where I've worked a whole 24-hour shift and done 1 call. Right. So there's no real rhyme or reason to it. It's not like weekends are busier or not. It's not like holidays are always crazy. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But so for me, it's a pretty good balance. It keeps things interesting. It's definitely different every day. You certainly have some repeat patients and stuff that can get a little bit exhausting at times, but for the most part you're always running on stuff that you have no idea what you're going to walk into. It's sometimes it's run-of-the-mill medical stuff, sometimes it's crazy PIs and car crashes and snowmobile accidents and all that stuff. So everything from grandma fall down, go boom, to guy got stabbed in a bar fight. So it definitely keeps you on your toes, which that was my main gripe with welding, was that it was the same job at the same table in the same corner of the same building, making the same parts all day, every day, 6 days a week. And I just got sick of it. So doing this when I'm not actively working on a call, we can sleep, eat, watch TV, do whatever we want. We're just expected to respond, quickly as soon as the pagers go off. So right. It's a good gig. I will say, don't become an EMT for the money, because right. You will not make the money. Again, depends largely where you go. Some departments pay really well. Again, it's kind of like that. Like, are you working for a hospital? Are you working for a for-profit, a non-profit? Are you working for like a township? A volunteer rescue service? Are you on like a full-time rescue team, or are you like a SWAT EMT or a SWAT medic, where you're, you kind of have 2 primary jobs where you're a cop and an EMT. So there's a lot of ways you can go with it, but just as kind of the like vanilla EMT, as it were, where you're just working on an ambulance, you're not going to make a huge amount of money. It is a good stepping stone for going into other careers in first responder kind of sector, right? Like police, fire, right? Flight EMS is another one that people kind of launch into a lot. There are a lot of people that will be an EMT for a while they're in nursing school or in PA, physician's assistant school, or med school or whatever. So it's a good way to get some hands-on experience, some patient contact hours with a comparatively low amount of like education hours.
Right.
You know, after only a couple of months of school, you're in an ambulance on clinicals, you know, directly dealing with patients, whereas with some nursing programs or PA programs, it could be semesters or years before you really get in the hospital doing that patient contact. So it's a good way to kind of like feel out whether or not you're going to be able to deal with the bodily fluids and the people on both on like a physical level of like lifting and moving and like, you know, helping them, but also on a level of like, just, are your people skills good enough? Are you a good communicator? Do you have a bedside manner? Are you kind of a, you know, not, right? There's a lot of people that are fantastic healthcare providers that have the bedside manner of a rock. And there's a lot of people that are the other way around, right? Like if my grandma was, you know, hurting or something, I would want these people there to comfort them and you know, be there for them. But as far as like medical skills go, you know, maybe they're not the one. So it's definitely a balance, and it takes a certain kind of person, but it's a good career. Just to understand that it's not a career that you're going to get rich off of.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Right. Well, it does. So this is kind of a little bit off of what we talked about prior, but you are on the search and rescue team, I believe, or
Yep.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that and the opportunities that somebody might have going into that?
So another one is location dependent. Most counties will have some form of a volunteer rescue service. In some cases that might be attached to the fire department. You might be like a volunteer firefighter that also has the equipment and the capacity of search and rescue. In our case, it's attached to and funded by the sheriff's department. So our local county sheriff runs it. We train roughly twice a month, and it's still a volunteer team. It's still like unpaid, all that, but all of our equipment is funded by the sheriff's and like tax dollars and stuff like that. It's one of the few good ways to spend tax dollars, in my opinion.
Right.
But then there are other teams, like we have a county north of us that is nonprofit. So all of their funding comes from fundraisers and from like grant money that they request grants for. So they have kind of a reverse setup to us, where we have a pretty decent roster. We're close to like 35 people, and our equipment is good. We definitely have a wider variety of equipment, but we have the like inertial drag of kind of like a political department, right? You know, there's a lot of red tape as far as like, you know, getting things approved for purchase, whereas their team is only like maybe 10 people, and they apply for grant money and it gets approved and they spend it how they see fit, right? So like they have nicer, newer radios than us. They have, you know, a nicer, you know, maybe not nicer, but they had a drone before we had a drone, that kind of thing. So it'll depend largely where you are, but it might be a CERT team, a community emergency response team. It might be search and rescue team. It might be like a volunteer, like just a rescue team, right? Like a vehicle extrication, high angle ropes, low angle ropes, water rescue, those type of things, where like you're not grid searching the woods, but you just are in charge of using the specialized equipment to get someone out of wherever they are. But I've been doing that for maybe like a year and 2 months now, I think.
Awesome.
It's been a pretty good experience. I've definitely had the opportunity to meet some good people and sort of refine some of my own knowledge, because a lot of those trainings that you go to are also useful just in like general outdoors type of hobbies, right?
Yeah.
Like we did trainings on, you know, how to use GPSs and how to use map and compass and how to use four-wheelers and snowmobiles. And, you know, granted, that's because our department has those things to train us on, right? We have a couple four-wheelers, we have a couple snowmobiles, all that. So it's been a good learning experience, and it's been a good, I don't like the word networking, but, you know, good way to meet people and kind of, especially if you are aiming to be employed by either the agency that you are volunteering for or a similar one, like in my case, I'm working full time as an EMT. I plan to eventually become a police officer, which we'll get to later. So the two deputies that run the team not only are in charge of that, so I know them there, but they're also deputies that I've worked with on quite a few scenes as an EMT. So it's a good way to like kind of learn who's in your area and what their names and faces are and stuff, and that helps out when you start applying places. And you know, even if you're just applying to be a volunteer, right? That alone, had I worked on these scenes with them beforehand and then applied to be a volunteer on the SAR team, because you do have to apply in our case anyways, it's sort of a job interview. They would have seen me, known me, and be like, oh yeah, you know, that would have been a leg up for me. So, but
just
yeah,
opening opportunities in the future if you want to go down those routes. So
yeah, definitely check out, just Google around your local area for local kind of like volunteer rescue type teams. I'm sure you'll find something, but it's definitely something that I would recommend looking into. It might be a little bit of a personal investment, both in time and money, because most of these teams you have to have your own backpack and your own survival gear and like that kind of stuff, but definitely worth it in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a good way to continue to build your knowledge and develop yourself. So another thing we've talked about is, what advice might you have for somebody who moves, another young man who's looking to become an EMT, or they're, you know, kind of on the edge of doing this, something that you might think would be helpful for them to know or hear?
So kind of going back to my original like intention of why I wanted to be an EMT was for being more prepared for like industrial accidents and stuff, right? So if that's the angle that you're coming at it from, like if you just want to learn more about medicine but you don't want to work as an EMT or work as a firefighter who is an EMT or a cop who is an EMT or something like that, I wouldn't necessarily recommend going to EMT school, because you're going to learn like 80% medical stuff and then like 20% or less trauma, right? So if all you want to be prepared for, or if your primary goal is to be prepared for the random traumatic accident that you happen across, or the random old person that, you know, falls down in Walmart and bonks their head on a shelf and is bleeding everywhere, or goes into cardiac arrest or something, my recommendation would be to go to a Stop the Bleed class and a CPR AED class. If you can attend both of those and, you know, get your CPR accreditation and learn how to use basic bleeding control equipment like tourniquets and wound packing gauze, that'll cover your bases for just about everything in like the normal civilian world that you might encounter. If you want to take it a step further, if you're an outdoorsy kind of person, I would do like a woofer class, a wilderness outdoor, I don't remember what it stands for, but it's woods medicine, you know, how to, you know, rip up your shirt and use sticks to make a leg brace, and how to build shelters and stuff if someone's, you know, losing heat and you need to warm them back up, and really interesting stuff kind of from like a, from the standpoint of like help is not right there. You know, whereas most of like basically everything in EMT school, every scenario ends with, and then get him to the hospital, because that's what we do, right? So I don't have any kind of like austere extended patient care training, right? I don't know how to take care of one person for weeks in the backcountry with nothing but some boiled water and sticks and some moss that I collected or whatever, right? So for general civilian preparedness stuff, I would say just Stop the Bleed and then CPR AED kind of stuff. If you want to take it a step further, there's MFR, which is Medical First Responder. So that's like one step below EMT Basic. It's a much shorter class. It qualifies you to do fewer things, but not that much fewer thing, or that many fewer things, right? So it still gets you, you know, a lot of cops are MFRs. Some smaller fire departments are all MFRs. You know, a lot of like non-transporting medical, like township volunteer kind of places are MFR level. So it'll get you a lot more of that medicine. It'll get you some patient contact hours with clinicals, that kind of thing. But it's a lot cheaper and it's a lot shorter. EMT, if you do it as night school, it's going to cost you about 6 months of your life, and probably in my case it was $2,000. Like I mentioned earlier, you can get sponsored and have a department pay for that, but that usually comes with the attached string of you working for them for a certain period of time, and, you know, fair enough, right? So if you were to do it like full time as like a college student, it would be about a semester, so it would be, about half as long, give or take. So just keep in mind that if you do go to EMT school, you will learn how to be an EMT, not how to be a prepared bystander, right? So you're going to get a huge amount of, I say huge amount, right? Huge amount relative to what most people know about medicine, not even touching like what a physician would do, right? 6 months, not 10 years.
Right.
So you'll get a huge amount of what I would call less relevant medical information unless you are treating patients, working in the 911 system, responding to calls, that kind of stuff. Because if you are an otherwise, young, healthy, regular kind of guy or gal or whatever, you're probably not going to be around people that are calling 911 all the time unless you have a family member with some kind of specific health problem, right? So what you need to be able to handle is like bleeding, basic like fevers and infections, maybe a broken wrist. So so EMT school is definitely a good education. Just understand what it is that you'll be learning and kind of give yourself a cost benefit analysis of if that price and time is worth what you want to do with it, right? If you want to work as an EMT, it's worth it. If you want to just kind of be a little bit more educated, then YouTube University is a free option. So
yeah, no, that's good. That's I learned from that too. I guess I figured it was more the prepared side, but it's good to know what you're getting yourself into and what you're actually going to be learning. So, Doug, what are your work-life goals for the next 5 years? Where do you want to see yourself progress to?
So professionally, I'm hoping to work for the state police here where we live. If that doesn't work out, then a local department. I'm kind of halfway through the quagmire of applying to these schools. It's just a lot of paperwork and interviews and background checks and all that stuff. So the goal would be state police. Hopefully I would be done with school by the end of this year. I guess personal life, within 5 years, I would like to marry my now girlfriend and move in together. And then just kind of continue on my journey of slowly chipping away at learning everything that I can learn about all these different, kind of facets of being a prepared citizen.
Right. Awesome. So you're an EMT basic. Can you explain the difference between an EMT and a paramedic, and then what levels of licensure are available for someone going into that pre-hospital emergency medicine, where they could go with that?
Sure. So the most common are EMT basic and paramedic, right? So I'm an EMT basic, as we've covered. The lowest kind of license class, or I don't want to say lowest because that makes it sound like it's worse, but the license that is the least amount of upfront education and has the narrowest scope of practice would be an MFR, which we have a lot of our like volunteer guys, a lot of our police guys are MFRs. So what that's going to do is it's going to get you like your basic your BLS, right? Basic lifesaver. So it'll be, CPR AED. It'll be basic airway management and ventilations. Depending on your jurisdiction, you may be able to use certain supraglottic airways. In our med control, you're allowed to use what's called an iGel as an MFR, which is one specific type of airway. So you're also trained in like stop the bleed, trauma management, that kind of stuff, but it's a pretty short, school, and it gets you enough knowledge that you can manage a scene until higher licenses arrive, like a paramedic unit, right? So moving up to an EMT basic covers all the same stuff. Or I suppose I should mention, as an MFR, you can also like administer oxygen and epinephrine for anaphylactic shock, right? So like allergic reactions. As an EMT basic, you can do all the same things. You gain a little bit of scope in like airway, right? So I can use 3 different types of supraglottic airways instead of just the one. I can assist in administering a patient's, a couple different types of patients' medications that they personally have, as well as my med control authorizes basics to do certain other things like draw up epinephrine for anaphylactic shock as opposed to just epinephrine auto injectors like an EpiPen. So there's not a huge difference. It's just a little bit more education and knowledge, medical background knowledge, that kind of stuff. So then the next level up is an AEMT, which is an advanced EMT, also called a specialist. And what a specialist does, they're seated right between a paramedic and an EMT basic, right? So a specialist, it says essentially everything a basic does, but then they can also start IVs. They can start IOs, which is an IV but into your bone instead of your vein, intraosseous. They can push some medications for various medical conditions that a basic can't, so it widens their pharmacology scope a little bit. And then they can like run IV fluids and things like that. And then once you get up to paramedic, that is like 2 years of school. It's the highest, more or less, pre-hospital license, right? There's like critical care paramedicine, which is like another accreditation that you can get. And again, this depends largely on your area, right? Your state laws, your local med control, everything. But paramedics in general have the whole drug box, right? There's like 80 or 90 something meds that they can give roughly. Again, don't quote me on these numbers because it depends on where you are, but they can give meds for just about anything that you would get in a hospital within reason. They're advanced cardiac life support trained, so they can use a manual defibrillator as opposed to an automated external defibrillator, an AED. They can specifically choose how much energy they want to use to defibrillate, when exactly they want to defibrillate. They can perform and interpret cardiac monitoring, EKGs, rhythm strips, that kind of thing, as well as do like pain management and a whole bunch of other stuff. So if you're looking to make a career out of pre-hospital medicine, you'd probably want to go paramedic. They can do the most, they get paid the most usually. If you are maybe just kind of dipping your toes in to see if you like it, or if you want to use it as a stepping stone to get somewhere else, like into nursing school or into police academy, MFR or basic, emergency medical technician basic is a good place to start for sure. And you can always advance your license level, right? It's not like a pick one and you're stuck with it, right? If you go to MFR school, you could then go to EMT school and then go to AEMT school and work your way up the ladder. You can go straight to medic school, or you can be an MFR and stay there for however long you like. So there's definitely a variety of options, both in scope of practice as well as education level, both in time, cost, and content of the education. But yeah, hopefully it'll be something that fits whatever it is that you're looking to do, and kind of get you into the 911 system and taking care of patients and saving lives.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, well, we'll take a quick break, then we'll hop into the next section. All right, we just heard a little bit about your career and your goals, and now we talk a little bit more about young men today. Obviously, you're a young man just like myself, and I think you're doing pretty well for today's standards. I think you've really set yourself up for success in a lot of ways, and I want to get your opinion on some things and see what you have to share to other young men today. So Doug, what advice would you have for young men today in society?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate it. That's very kind of you to say. I do my best. So as far as advice for young men today, I think one of the biggest things is to just be reliable. Like, it doesn't matter what you say you will do if you don't do it, right? So it could be as simple as, saying that you'll meet up with a friend at a certain day at a certain time. It could be as drastic as, showing up to your job every single day, on time, every time, no fail. Like, there's a range, right? But just being a dependable person, I think, will get you very far in life, and that's something that I see a void in. It's very hard to find good, solid, moral, reliable people. It's not as hard to find morally solid people. It's just hard to find the people that will then execute on everything that they say they will do. So, if I could, well, I guess go back to my younger self or just talk to, other young men in general, which is what I'm doing now, I suppose. Just show up, do what you say you will do, and just give it what everything you've got, right? Don't do anything by half measure, right? If you've decided that whatever you're doing is something that is important to you, give it what you've got, right? Give it your all. So priorities is another big thing that I've been thinking about recently. Actually, was kind of first started on this little train of thought from a Brett Cooper video from the Daily Wire, but basically it's just, instead of saying like, oh, I haven't gotten around to that, or I haven't done that yet, or I'll get there eventually, just say, instead of I haven't done it yet, I haven't prioritized that. And that'll kind of adjust your mindset on, did you not do it because you couldn't, or did you not do it because you didn't put the emphasis on it that you maybe should have, right? So if somebody asked me like, oh, hey, did you apply to XYZ yet? Did you do this paperwork? Did you go here, do this, do that, accomplish this, whatever, instead of making up excuses and being like, no, well, I've just been busy, I haven't prioritized that yet. Because it's the truth, right? If you haven't done it yet, it's most likely because it's not a priority of yours. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is up to you to decide, right? You set your own priorities. So I would say just take a good, long, hard look at how you prioritize the things that you prioritize, what matters to you most as far as like your life goals and your kind of personal relationships, both with your family, your friends, your loved ones, whatever. But prioritize appropriately. And when you've made up your mind on something, give it everything you've got, and, commit. Don't be a flake, right? That's just a bad look on you, and it's frustrating for everyone else. So show up, work hard, and, prioritize appropriately.
Right. That kind of, I guess, bleeds into the next question. What do you believe is most important for young men to set themselves up for success today?
Yeah, so I'm going to harp on it again, reliability, right? Like, show up when you say you're going to show up. If I ask somebody, like a friend of mine, like, hey, do you want to hang out at this day, this time, something simple, right? I don't care if the answer is no, right? Like, you don't have to give me an excuse. If you don't want to do whatever the thing is, you don't have to come up with I've got to stay home and pluck my eyebrows or whatever. Like, you can just tell me no. Just don't say yes and then flake and not show up, right? That's what gets me. It's not the how often you come along and do whatever. It's the how often you follow through with your word, right? If you say no and then you don't come, I'm not surprised. If you say yes and then you flake an hour beforehand, that's going to be, a pretty big blight on your personal record as far as my viewpoint of you is concerned, right? Once or twice here and there, not a big deal, but if that's a consistent habit of yours, you're gonna start to burn a lot of bridges with people. You might not even know you're doing it, but following through is huge. It's probably the most important thing that I can think of. Other than that, I would say work ethic is something that you can always improve on. There's a lot of people with good work ethic. There's a lot of people without. So there's definitely that. So another thing that I think is really important for young men to prioritize to set themselves up for success is building good life habits, right? You made a video not too long ago about routine that I thought made a lot of good points. And just sort of branching off of the routine is, having good habits to turn into a routine, right? So if your routine is eating junk food 4 times a day every single day, well, you're consistent with it, but it's not a healthy habit for you, right? So I know you hear it a lot from kind of the online, like, tactical community, the online, like, masculine community, that kind of stuff, but go to the gym couple times a week if you can do that, right? It doesn't have to be an actual gym. It can be a home gym. It can be running outside. But just exercise your body consistently, however you see fit to do that. Challenge your mind consistently. Something that I try to do instead of just watching like general like TV shows, movies, that kind of stuff, is to learn things from YouTube videos. So I certainly still watch a fair amount of entertainment on YouTube that's purely just like entertainment value, has no technical depth to it. But I also have learned almost everything that I know about all of my technical hobbies from YouTube, right? I learned a lot of, stop the bleed, like medical stuff before EMT school from YouTube. I learned everything I know about rifle shooting from YouTube. I learned everything I know about radios from YouTube. So you can take a lot of that time that you would otherwise be spending just kind of existing, watching the newest, hottest, whatever TV show, or you could be learning, which I think, like I said, it doesn't have to be all of the time that you spend watching videos, content, TV, whatever. But if you, take a segment of that time that you would otherwise be spending kind of just existing and turn it into educational time and challenge your mind and come up with problems to solve, I think that'll help you a lot. That'll be a good habit to build. And then, just trying to eat decently well. It's something that I actually struggle with probably the most recently, is just like good food. Basically everything you buy in the grocery store is poison and cancerous, so that's super demoralizing. But just do your best to try and get, enough protein, and try to avoid junk food, kind of stuff. Like obviously, you can have everything in moderation, right? But potato chips shouldn't be your entree, and you should try to, maybe eat eggs in the morning instead of highly processed cereal and stuff like that. So try to build those good life habits and then turn them into a good, healthy, stable routine that you can maintain for a long period of time.
Yeah, that's good. It's good advice. You and I both, try and set ourselves up for success in as many ways as we can, and we still, fall short in areas like you just said. Food right now is something an area you're working on, but what is something you would like to improve on or see yourself dedicate time to get better at as a man today, in the next year, or whatever it might be?
So yeah, diet is definitely one of them. And I would say just kind of like as a general blanket, it would just be like health overall, right? I go to the gym not as frequently as I should, right? I'm probably averaging like twice a week right now. I would like that to be 3 or 4 times a week. I want to increase my strength training. I want to increase my cardiovascular health, right? I want to be able to run farther, faster. I want to start swimming more. The gym that I have membership at has access to a pool. I just never use it, right? I went once a couple of weeks ago and it was actually quite enjoyable, and I want to try and, make that a regular habit, because that's really good for your overall bodily health. Uses a lot of muscle groups and gets your heart rate up and all that. And then just make a point of getting some outside time, right? Go out, touch grass, I hear that all the time, but to just, even if it's just a walk around the block, but to get fresh air, get the vitamin D from the sun, all that stuff, and just try to make a point of prioritizing fitness and health, because at the end of the day, again, it kind of goes back to that, like the training versus gear thing, right? Like you can have the coolest, fanciest, biggest stockpile of the best gear and the best, long-term food storage and the most ammo, but if you can't carry it and move, if you can't get to wherever you need to be to survive or to defend innocent life or whatever it is that you're doing, it could be as simple as if you can't get to your job because it's on the 6th floor and the elevator's broken and you're out of breath on the 2nd floor, right? Like you need to be able to show up and take care of yourself, your family. You need to be an asset, not a liability. So for me, I want to continue trying to build my strength and overall health, especially working as an EMT, right? Like my ability to move and lift things has a direct correlation to, how much work my partner has to do. So if I can be as big and strong and healthy and good to go as I can be, it decreases his risk of injury because he doesn't have to lift as much. And it also decreases my risk of injury because I now have a healthier, stronger, more stable body that's not as prone to getting a tweaked back or, throwing out a joint or a disc or whatever, because I've spent the time in the gym to get bigger and stronger and healthier. So it's something that I'm definitely kind of in the beginning of my journey, my learning process on. I've been working out for a while. I just haven't really executed on the diet part of it, so I've been struggling to see results. And it's one of those things that's like I know how to fix it, I just haven't had the discipline to do it yet. So that's kind of where I'm working on for improvement, is just overall health.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Everybody's got something to improve on, and finding out what it is first, and then, like you just said, executing it is a noble thing to do, if nothing else, to always be trying to improve yourself. So
yeah, I guess that's another thing that young men can improve on, is personal discipline, right?
Yeah, 100%. I would agree. I guess this kind of goes along with what we've been talking, but what do you think is lacking from manhood and masculinity today in young men? You see so many, quite frankly, just feminine men. What do you think is lacking from our society that's getting young men to this stage?
I think probably the most glaring deficit is the confidence to be a man and to be okay with that, right? Because if you have the confidence to be masculine, to be a protector, to be a provider and a protector, and to just be all of the things that a man can, should, and hopefully will be, as we all grow and improve, the men in general would be so much less affected by all of the propaganda and all of the toxic this and toxic that, and all of the whining feminists that hate everything that you do with your life, right? If you're just unabashedly, courageously a man, and not toxic and violent and all that other stuff, but it's the same warrior in a garden thing, right? Like you should have the capacity for utter and complete and brutal and immediate violence, and know how to bridle and control that, and be a kind and loving and gentle and honest and good person that is a family man and a lover and a caregiver of their kids, but also can cut the lights and go to work if stuff ever hits the fan and it comes down to protecting innocent life, right? So you should have that capacity and that skill and that knowledge, and know how to control it, and just having the discipline and the courage to do that publicly, especially these days, where everyone is telling you you're wrong, you're toxic, you're horrible, you're the reason that society is awful, everything is your fault. I think that's a big ask in a lot of ways, because it really does feel like the world is just trying to crush you down as small as they can get you, and just beat you up for everything that you do. But the courage to stand up and say, no, this is the way, this is how it's meant to be, and this is how I'm going to be the best person that I can be, is a big component of that, right? Because if you have all the other components but not the courage to say it out loud, then what good is it to anyone, right? So Be loud, be proud, and be a good, loving protector. Yeah, that's awesome. I think the biggest thing for, like you just said, young men, is be courageous. That's such a big thing. I think it's a good word for that. And what society throws at us today, just have courage in the face of whatever you're going through. So yeah. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, we'll get on to the next section then. All right, Doug. So we just talked about some of your career and some of your advice for young men today. And next, I kind of want to move into your hobbies, what you've gotten into, what you find fascinating, and just general things I know you're doing to prepare yourself to be ultimately a better man, and I guess a better protector, if nothing else. But you also find them interesting, and I know you like doing these things. So the first thing I want to talk about, which I don't think is viewed as much by the civilian world, for lack of a better term. It's used in military and police, and even at EMTs, you guys use radios and comms and stuff. But I think the general public doesn't really have a good knowledge on radios and how they operate. So I just kind of want to know, how did you start and get into radios and comms? So I started with Baofeng, like everybody does. If you don't know, Baofeng UV5R is like the ubiquitous, like $25, $30, walkie-talkie ham radio that you can buy on Amazon. They suck for a lot of things, but they are $25 and they do work. So I had one of those. This was before I even knew how to get a ham license, and I just got it to kind of play with and sort of learn how they worked, and listen in on some of the local ham stuff and NOAA weather and FM radio and whatever else. And then after a while of that, I decided that I wanted to get my amateur radio license. So I studied up for that and got my technician license, which is the first level, which essentially, in layman's terms, qualifies you to use fancy walkie-talkies, right? You're still only line of sight, right? You're still only like a couple of miles kind of distance, but they're way better than like your Walmart variety, right? The hardware is physically better at listening, it's physically better at transmitting, you have better antennas, you have better mics, you have better everything, right? And then I had my technician class license for about a year, and then I learned astronomically more about radios in that year of having my technician license than I ever did with the year or 2 or 3 that I owned that Baofeng before having my license. Because what that license allowed me to do was to transmit, and not only to transmit, but to transmit on the local amateur radio repeaters. And then shortly thereafter, I kind of like figured out where I could be and still hit these towers and where the towers were. If you don't know, an amateur radio repeater is much like a cell phone tower, right? It's like a big antenna on a big, antenna tower, kind of like a cell tower. And when you talk into it with your handheld radio, it simultaneously retransmits at a higher power so that other people can hear you from further away. So, with a walkie-talkie, you can get maybe a mile or 2 or 3, depending on terrain, heavily depending on terrain. But with my radio that's mounted in my car, which is a 50-watt transmitter, I can hit the local repeater from just about anywhere in town, which in some cases up to like 30, 40 miles away.
Wow.
So that, being able to transmit and get to know some of the other people in the area that were radio amateurs or ham radio operators, whatever you want to call them, did way more to increase my knowledge from a technical perspective than just owning a Baofeng and like fiddling with it ever did. So I'm deeply grateful that I got that license when I did and started learning when I did. Then a year later, I got my general class amateur radio license, which is the middle tier, right? Extra is the top. But the general class license allows you to use HF radio, which is high frequency radio, which is actually the lower, it's a confusing name. So you have like low frequency, medium frequency, high frequency, which are all like way down here. And then you have very high frequency or VHF, ultra high frequency or UHF, and then like super high frequency, and then it goes up into like microwave after that. So VHF, UHF is like your walkie-talkie space, and then HF is that frequency space is capable of being reflected off the atmosphere, so you can bounce radio signals thousands of miles. So that radio or that license, and then the radio that I bought after that, especially when paired with a computer, allow me to talk to most of the country pretty reliably, depending on the time of day and the weather. And then in some cases, most of Europe, parts of South America. I've even talked to people in like Africa before.
Really?
With the same power output that my handhelds do, right?
Wow.
5-10 watts, right? There are radios that do way more than that. I don't have those because all of my equipment is man portable, right? It all fits in a rucksack, and I can carry it with me hiking or in the camping in the field, whatever. So yeah, I guess I got started just by buying a Baofeng and noodling around with it, but I really got going once I got that ham license, and it's not the education that I had to get the license that did anything for me. It was being able to then truly practice and test and analyze what different antennas did and what different repeaters did at different ranges and how elevation played a change into that. Because one of the nice things about repeaters is that you don't necessarily need anyone to talk back to you, right? Most repeaters, when you release your push-to-talk, if you hit the repeater, it'll make a beep or like a squelch, like a noise, to let you know that you contacted the repeater. So even if no one's there to answer you, you can still tell if you're getting in or not. You might not be very audible on someone else's end, but at least you're hitting the tower, right? So you can kind of like practice on your own. Whereas before I had my license, I had to have, like my basically like Walmart walkie-talkies, and then I had to have somebody else to actively be, helping me test range, which is just super limited. So
yeah.
I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of the fact that you have to get a government license to use a radio. It's one of those things where it kind of is what it is. You know, understand what your radio does, how far it transmits, all that stuff. Do with that information as you see fit. But I will say, from a practical standpoint of like learning and testing and analyzing, getting your amateur license will make that process astronomically easier. You can do it without it, but it makes it astronomically easier.
Right.
So yeah, I suppose that's how I got rolling with comms.
Yeah. So what would you recommend people do to get started into the radios and the comms world? Like, where should they, get started? You obviously have learned this and figured out what works and what doesn't work. Where do you recommend people really get their foot in the door with radios and comms?
Yeah, so I don't know that there's necessarily anything that I would directly say don't get or to steer clear of. I think it's more important to understand the capability that you're purchasing, right? So first and foremost, in radios, as with everything else, right, you get what you pay for. So all else being equal, if you buy a radio that costs $25 and then another radio that costs $500, there's going to be a massive difference in the quality of those radios. And I'm not just talking about like, it feels nicer, it's got a better case, the buttons click better or whatever. Like the front end of that radio, which is basically like your antenna and then the first couple of electrical components that are receiving and decoding that audio or that RF radiation and turning it into audio, the front end on that more expensive radio will be astronomically better. And that's one thing that a lot of people focus on too much when they first get into radio is transmit power as opposed to receiver quality, right? So the amount of power that your handheld transmits doesn't actually matter that much. Not nearly as much as you think it does anyways. And I'll try to explain this without getting too deep in the math, but basically signal strength, like receive signal strength and transmit signal strength is a logarithmic function, which basically means that, on your XY graph, instead of it being a straight line, it kind of goes like this. Right. And it goes like up really sharp and then it flattens out pretty aggressively. So in order to, so there's a scale called S units, and it's basically like 1 to 9, and it's just how strong you're coming in on the received end. So in order to go up 1 S unit, you have to quadruple your output power. So to go from like an S7 to an S8, you would have to go from 5 watts to 20 watts, right? And when you consider that most of these handheld radios, especially like the Baofangs you see on Amazon, kind of the vanilla Baofeng is like a 5 watt radio. Also keep in mind that they're cheap Chinese radios, so they actually put out like 1.7 watts or something. So they'll see a lot of them that are marketed as like, 6 watt Baofeng, 8 watt 10 watt Baofeng. It's like, okay, well, first of all, you're not even getting that anyways because they brag about their output power and then it doesn't actually deliver. But also, even if it was a 5 watt versus a 10 watt, difference, you're still only getting like a quarter S unit or a half S unit or something like that, depending on what the radio actually puts out for you. So a lot of my Baofangs from home, I can hit a repeater. Like I can contact the local repeater. Everyone can hear me just fine. I cannot hear that repeater at all with that Baofeng. Like my radio does not pick up anything. So the way that I know that I can do this is because I have a different a software-defined radio, which is like a little USB stick with an antenna on it, plugged into my computer, which is a better receiver, and I can hear myself on my computer talking through this tower, but I can't hear myself on on the Baofeng in the slightest. So if you're just starting out, I would say spend what you can afford and understand what you're getting, right? If all you can afford is a $25 Baofeng, get a $25 Baofeng and learn how to use it and really understand the ins and outs, right? It's kind of the same thing with guns, right? If I would take somebody with a high point that trains with it every week, that's got 20,000 rounds through the thing, that knows that thing in and out, rather than somebody with some Gucci 2011 that shot a box through it 5 years ago, right?
Right.
Yes, equipment matters, and there will be some things that you just straight up cannot do, period, end of story, with a cheaper radio or a cheaper gun. But knowing and understanding how that equipment works and its capabilities and its limitations is so much more valuable than just having the Gucci gear and not knowing how to use it or what it does. So start with as good of a handheld as you can afford, and then just use it as a learning tool, right? Your first radio is not going to be your forever radio. Even if you think it is, you're probably going to learn more about radios and realize that there was some other feature you wanted. And then you're going to end up just kind of learning and expanding from there. So yeah, to get started, get what you can afford, understand what it does, and then I would also recommend getting your amateur radio license. A lot of opinions on that. Like I said earlier, I'm not a huge fan of the fact that you're forced to do that, but it will make your learning process much easier, and it's worth it, in my opinion.
That's good. Yeah, the radio license thing is a little frustrating, I guess, but
so I will say they're not hard to get.
right. Just
Like, if you're a relatively, sharp guy or girl, like you can probably crank out the study material in like a day or two. You can take it online. It only costs like, a sum total of probably less than $50. It's a 10-year license. The license lets you do a fair bit with your radios. So I feel like there's like two groups of people, right? There's the group of people that won't get it on a principle standpoint because like, my freedoms and all that, which I totally get. And I don't disagree with. And then there's the other group of people that won't get their license because it's some cloudy, difficult to navigate, shady government, whatever, like you got to go to the FCC's website, like what even is that? And it's really not that hard to get. There's lots of tutorials on YouTube on how to get it. Ham Radio Crash Course on YouTube has a ton of great content. Ham Radio 2.0 has a lot of great content. Temporarily offline ham radio has a lot of good content. There's tons and tons and tons of education and support for ham radio stuff. So that's another perk of like getting your license, is you kind of gain access. You can watch it without a license. Obviously, it's YouTube.
right.
But you sort of gain access to these like communities of people that will help you with just about anything. There's a lot of strong personalities in ham radio that will absolutely just rain on your parade because they think it's fun. But there's also a lot of good people that will help you out. They're usually less willing to help you out if you don't have your license, but there's a lot of good like tinkerers out there that love to talk, technical stuff, gear stuff, all that. But
another skill you've picked up, and I know been training actually for a little while now, is long range shooting. And that's another thing that people don't, it's not quite as fancy or as cool on the outside as kicking in a door and clearing a building, and that's what a lot of people want to do, have the short AR and the cool muzzle brake or the suppressor or whatever. But long range shooting has got value, and I'm curious how you got into long range shooting, why you got into it, and I guess what you've learned.
So I got into it. So originally I wanted an AR, and it just wasn't something that was feasible for me at the time based on where I was living and my budget and everything else. So I ended up getting a bolt action rifle instead. And I had done some research and knew that you needed to spend up on some good glass to make it worth it. So, I bought a relatively budget rifle with a, pretty like mid-grade scope that costs, close to double what the rifle did. Not quite, but close. It's a 6.5 Creedmoor Savage rifle. And I got into it because I wanted a rifle, honestly. Like that was the main bit, right? Like I had a pistol, I had a pump shotgun, I wanted an AR, but I couldn't get one at the time, just because, like I said, expensive and living conditions and stuff. So I was like, well, if I can't get an AR, I might as well get a bolt rifle and start learning that skill. Turns out that it's not nearly as difficult as it looked from the outset. I was rather intimidated by it. I was like, I've never shot more than 25 yards or 50 yards or whatever. Like, you tell me I can hit a target at 600? Like, what? I don't think I can do that. It's not easy, but it's way easier than I thought it would be. So there's a lot of utility in being able to shoot long range, which we'll get to in a minute. But the main kind of perk is that if you have the marksmanship skills necessary to hit a target consistently at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1,000 yards, you're not going to have any trouble, hitting something at 10, 20 yards, doing more CQB-esque, shorter range kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a great way to hone your hard skills as far as shooting goes, your trigger press, your position building, right? Getting in a stable position with a bipod in the bag and all that stuff. Being able to control your breathing and how to use a scope, and understanding external ballistics, which is basically everything that happens from the time that your bullet leaves the barrel till the time it hits the target. So all of your, drop due to gravity, your wind deviation, your spin drift, your Coriolis, all this crazy stuff that, you can get super into the weeds on it if you want to, but just learning what happens to bullets as they've left the barrel and before they hit the target will give you a far better understanding across all platforms, not only your precision bolt gun, right? So now with my external ballistic knowledge, I can take a different kind of rifle, a different caliber, a different platform. I can take a pistol caliber, something or other, either a handgun or like a carbine, and understand what drop does at distance and how zero distance affects your holds and stuff. And it's not that you can't do this without a bolt gun, right? Or a precision gun, excuse me. You could certainly just buy, an AR and learn your zeros and holds. It's not that hard, but knowing that coming into other platforms, regardless of how you learned it and how you got there, has definitely been helpful. And it takes a lot of the sort of black magic and confusion out of ballistics, and why did I hit it that time but not the next time, even though I did the same thing? Well, there was a gust of wind, or there was, the rifle was tilted sideways a little bit, and that, kind of screws up the collimation of your scope and barrel, and now you're not actually aiming at what it looks like you're aiming at. So it's a good skill to develop. It's not nearly as intimidating as it was from the outside. The biggest thing I would say is just get good equipment. It doesn't have to be top of the line equipment, just good equipment, and then make sure that it's all mounted properly. Don't cheap on your scope rings, make sure everything's torqued properly. Watch YouTube videos on how to mount scopes correctly, and all the little nuances there, and then just go and practice and learn, and get a ballistic app on your phone.
Mm-hmm.
They're free in a lot of cases. You can pay for better ones, but put in your rifle profile, your cartridge barrel length, muzzle velocity, if you know it, right? You can just read it off the side of the box. It won't be quite as perfect as your actual muzzle velocity, but, and then just type in, all right, 600 yards. Well, for me, that's 4.4 mils of correction and a tenth of a mil left for spin drift. And that's about it, right? As long as your fundamentals are good, you'll be in business. So it's a fun thing to get into. It is a rather expensive hobby. I also reload my own ammunition, which is expensive up front for the equipment, but I also get, about $1.50 off per round, right? Factory ammo for 6.5 is about $2.50 a round for Hornady white box, and I can load it for about 95 cents a round. So it saves me a lot of money there, especially considering I've got 1,500 rounds through that rifle already of 6.5 Creedmoor. So that's a lot of money saved on ammo.
It's playing the long game, buying it up front and then reloading. Yeah, no, that's cool. I long range is something I definitely, started to touch. I've got a bolt gun now, and I want to get more into that. It's something I've looked into. But what do you see the value of long range shooting today? Where do you see that playing out? I guess for your normal average Joe.
So I think obviously for everything I just said about kind of learning more about shooting external ballistics, but I think the big thing that a lot of people don't realize is that when we're talking about the true purpose of the Second Amendment of defending, yourself from tyranny, be it, your own government, a foreign invading government, it doesn't matter. You don't have the manpower or logistics, period, to go toe-to-toe with a conventional military. I don't care how rich you are and how many friends you are and how many ARs you've got in the safe and how many pallets of 5.56 in your basement. You cannot go toe-to-toe with a conventional military in a conventional warfare sense, right? You can't go World War II on France with you and your buddy, or on China, or on any country, right? It doesn't matter. It just isn't going to happen. So hence why guerrilla warfare and insurgency style warfare is a thing. You have fewer resources, fewer people, fewer types of weapons and ordnance and all this stuff. So you have to adapt your tactics essentially, right? So knowing how, again, ballistics works at range, it might only be a 100-yard shot or a 200-yard shot. And that's not even out of the realm of possibility for like a self-defense encounter, right? It might not be yourself that you're defending, but think of some like larger buildings, right? Hallways on, obviously most colleges don't let you carry, but like think of like a hallway in like a larger type of like office or school building like that, or like airports, like terminal hallways and stuff. There's some pretty long shots there, and granted, you may only have your pistol on you, but it's the principles still apply, right? Good trigger press, good sight alignment, good breath control, all that stuff. And then on the worst side of things, God forbid it ever gets to this point, and I dearly hope that it never does. But if you ever had to fight off an invading force, right, you're probably not just gonna stroll up to their headquarters and kick the door and throw in some flashbangs and go booging, right? You're gonna be, on a mountaintop somewhere in the woods, surviving off of whatever you can find, and maybe taking like one shot, and then moving to an entirely different position because your position is now compromised and they're sending in drones after you, right? So being able to extend your standoff distance where you're still effective, but you're lessening the immediate impact that an adversary can have on you, I think is a valuable skill that will become more prevalent as the world continues to deteriorate. And again, I dearly hope it never gets to this point. I have no intention of going out into the mountains and just, letting stuff fly. I really hope that I can, keep living the nice, quiet suburban life, essentially. But as a contingency, I think that's a valuable skill, especially when paired with proper communications infrastructure. Because that's another thing that like people don't take for granted, or people do take for granted, is that their phone just always works, their Wi-Fi just always works, their TV always works, everything always works. They can just turn it on and talk to anyone, anywhere, all around the world, right? So, having a robust off-grid communications infrastructure, I think, is important for a lot of reasons that people don't necessarily emphasize. It's getting there, it's moving in that right direction. And then same thing with long-range shooting. It's one of those, like, it's not an edge case, but it's a less like glitz and glamour sect of shooting where everyone wants the pop and the flash and the cool guy factor of the wearing their dual tube nods in the Wendy's parking lot with their skull wearing night vision drip from their favorite Instagram whoever, right? But they don't want to go in and put in the hard time and train. They don't want to go to the gym and train. They don't want to go to the long range and start throwing lead at 1,000 yards and figuring out how exactly to make that happen on a reliable level. They don't want to do that in weird positions. That's not just a nice comfy shooting bench, right? So learning and honing a lot of these sort of kind of more edge case or less sort of like glamorous skills, I think is and will continue to prove to be very valuable. And that doesn't necessarily just pertain to like comms and shooting, right? Like shelter building is another one that no one really likes to, other than those like 3 a.m. bushcraft videos that we all watch on YouTube. But just understanding a lot of the less kind of sexy skills, I think, is a really good thing to do. Yeah.
So getting into the firearm world, obviously it's a big world. You have tons of different choices of weapons and different places that you could start. But where do you recommend that someone starts in the firearm world? Whether that be handguns all the way up to long rifles or long guns?
So I would agree with you that it's definitely a big wide world of firearms out there. And to get started, I think with the current state of the world, right, I think we're in a place where an everyday carry handgun is still probably your most valuable, your most used, and your most kind of dependable and important option, right? So while I definitely see a use case for just about any kind of class of firearms you could have, right? Like an AR, a shotgun, a bolt action rifle, a hunting cartridge, a long range cartridge, whatever. I think if you're just gonna, get off the ground, get your first gun, assuming that you're, able to, with how old you are, where you live, all those, unconstitutional requirements, I think getting an everyday carry handgun is definitely where I would go. Specifically, I would get a double stacked 9mm duty handgun, striker fired polymer, Glock 19 if you're right-handed. If you're left-handed, I carry a VP9. But it's also important to get one that is big enough that you can comfortably shoot and train with it, and small enough that you can still conceal it on your person, right? So that'll vary depending on your stature and frame size. But don't get a subcompact just because it's easy to conceal, because you'll never shoot it because they're no fun, right? So get a good quality, reliable handgun, get a weapon light for it, get a optic if you can afford it, get a good holster. I prefer appendix carry. I like the T-Rex Arms models, but there's lots of them out there. And then make sure that you save some budget for at least 1,000 rounds of training ammunition, if not more than that. So get a good everyday carry handgun, get your concealed carry license, and train, right? Once you've gained proficiency with that, have a little bit extra budget, then maybe start looking into expanding into a carbine or a long-range precision rifle or something like that. But everyday carry is, that's what you're trusting your life to when you're out and about in public. So that's where I would start.
Awesome, yeah, I couldn't agree more, 100%. Awesome. Well, Doug, it's been a pleasure. Hopefully, not hopefully, I know you've inspired somebody out there that might see this and get them on the right step, whether it means, chasing after their EMT goals or getting into comms or whatever it is, pursuing a better life, becoming a better man. So I appreciate your time. Thank you for being somebody who embodies the warrior in a garden. So it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me on. I really hope that somebody out there's gotten something out of this. So.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody has. Yeah, awesome. All right, guys, if you made it all the way to the end, I really appreciate you watching. Hopefully this has been an encouragement to somebody. And if you like what you saw, and like the video, subscribe. Hopefully we'll get more of these interviews out, and we'll keep content coming to you all. But thank you again for making it all the way to the end.